Hello and welcome to the second lecture in Sum Generale's Decolonizing Knowledge series. I'm your host, Klaas van der Tempel. With me today as well, you can't see her yet, but my co-host Anna-Lynn Michielsen will be asking some questions later. And our speaker, Dr. Rolando Vázquez, Associate Professor of Sociology at the UCR and UCU. Dr. Vázquez, if I can turn to you. In your first lecture for us, you introduced us to the concept of decolonization. And now you're going to tell us more about how it applies specifically to our business here in Delft, which is design and engineering.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Klaas. Well, I was thinking that today there is a big debate around a new initiative from the European Commission for the European Green Deal that aims to turn the EU climate neutral by 2050. And the big debate that came out of it is because they name it the new Bauhaus.
There's a debate about the new Green Deal.
Yes, and particularly because they name it the new Bauhaus, I think it's an important entry point to our discussion on design and engineering. Because the EU people thought that it would be nice to call it new Bauhaus. And we thought it's not a nice name for a project for renewing Europe, right? Now, why? That is the point. And the why is because Bauhaus is a central part of the heritage, European heritage of modernism. And it is a design and engineering movement in Germany in the early 20th century that is very well known in the circles of design and engineering and art. And we thought, well, if we want to produce or to move towards a Europe that is environmentally sustainable, and not just sustainable, but that cares for the earth, and I would say not just for its impact in the European continent, but for its impact globally, right? It's not just about reducing emissions here, but all the emissions of what we consume that are done somewhere else, right? Then we thought the Bauhaus could not work, and because the principles of modernism were such that the human had the power to transform the earth for its own benefit, right? So this anthropocentric humanism that will say the human is superior to the earth, we can extract whatever we want from the earth to design it ourselves, right? To produce a designed environment. Right?
To me, Bauhaus, I don't know much about it. I just have this image of architecture of just straight edges and boxes.
Yes.
Right?
And functionalism very much. But so that's what we are thinking. Well, a heritage that connects to the earth in this way, and that was not diverse at all and not inclusive at all, is not a name that can be used for an inclusive Europe and an ecologically viable Europe. So I think I'm raising this political issue that is happening today around the name, because it shows for us how we need to overcome the tradition of modernism in design and engineering, right? And the two main elements that we see are happening in the modernist tradition, or the whole idea of modern civilization that gets expressed in design and engineering, is one, the anthropocentric principle, as I said, the human over the earth, and the earth as an object that we consume, and that is leading us to a term I use in my writings, that is earthlessness, towards the loss of the earth. Right? If we keep on moving that modernist idea of progress and technology, we will end up consuming the whole planet, right? And that is connected to the second problem, that is the idea that only some humans have the power to design the world, right? Through their own rationality. And this, we think, is the problem of Eurocentrism, of a monoculture becoming a global design. So that says our way of living is better than the indigenous ways of living, for example. And they are in the past. They need to modernize, right? And this tendency is leading us towards what I have called worldlessness. So we can understand the problems of modernism being, yes, producing a utopia of civilization and progress on the basis of a relation to earth that is leading us to earthlessness, and a relation to other people of the world that is denigrating or erasing their knowledges and their ways of living to worldlessness. So so that's the problem we have with the Bauhaus, and we think if a continent like Europe has to renew itself, it has to move itself towards pluriversality, towards inclusion, towards a non-anthropocentric relation to life on Earth.
And a completely different way of living, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. It would imply a different way of living.
So have you requested an alternative or supplied an alternative to the EU instead of Bauhaus?
Well, you know, our concern is not just the name itself, like
it's the philosophy.
The philosophy behind it, and we are saying, well, you know, we need a participative approach. We need to listen to the plurality of voices in Europe, because there's a great diversity in Europe that gets also silenced under this name Bauhaus, right? So we want an inclusive process. It's not about the name. The name is just a sign that it is stepping on a legacy that is not inclusive and ecocidal, right?
But at the core, are you also, is decoloniality saying that technology is bad per se? Because as I, understand humanity, one of the things that makes us human is our technology, and we all have it, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a very important question, and one that I have to explain a little bit more. So, on the one hand, you have the European or the Western critique of technology that is very important for us as well, where in moments like the Jew Holocaust and Hiroshima, many thinkers thought, well, technology is not necessarily good, because you needed a lot of technology for the Jew Holocaust, like a lot of architects and design put in place and bureaucracy, and you also needed a lot of technology for the nuclear bomb, right? And so many thinkers thought, for example, the Frankfurt School, or Zygmunt Bauman, or Hannah Arendt, thought, well, there needs to be an ethical orientation to technology, right? Technology is not good in itself, right? And not only that possibly the ways of practicing technology have been such that they don't open the spaces for these ethical questions, right? For why am I doing this? Why am I designing this? Right? Is it for extraction or is it for caring of the earth, right? Is it for war or is it for healing, right? And so I think there is let's call it a central myth of modernity, that is the idea that instrumental rationality will save the world. Like progress.
Instrumental rationality?
Yeah, so like technological progress will lead us to a better world. Like it's an equation, and social critique has shown, well, there is not such an equation, right? The development of technology doesn't necessarily lead to a better world. And I think the fact that we are facing climate collapse and extinction has a lot to do with the technologies we have developed that are capable of massively consuming the resources of Earth and polluting the planet, right? So the decolonial inflection to this critique is to say, is not to go against the possibility of, let's say, technology, but is to transform this question of what for, whose technology, for whom, right? For what type of life, right? And this question needs to be there. So, so instead of this, let's call it arrogance of modernism, of designing the good life for others, how would it be a design or an engineering that is starting from listening to others, right? For allowing for other forms to express themselves, right? I remember a cartoon that was in a book on diversity that showcased the difference between peoples in the Pacific and the Netherlands, and how the approach to the sea, right? Some people will have raised houses to allow the sea to come in and to go down, right, and have boats, and other people will build dams, So I think this shows a lot how you connect to the world and to the flows of nature, or against them by the use of technology. Both are technologies, right? But they have a very different understanding of our relation to the earth.
One that tries to control more, and one that tries to live sort of in harmony with natural processes.
Yes. So, for example, many indigenous philosophers or indigenous sciences know this, right? For example, they know that putting a dam on a river would kill the life up the river, right, and down the river, and will cause great ecological damage. But the dam is producing electricity, not for the people that live there, but for the people that are far away in the consumer society, right? So this is for an example where their knowledge is very clear, that they know the relations of the river with the network of life, right, in the ecosystem, that the engineers that want to produce electricity are not asking themselves about. They are not asking this question. Right.
So is this a role that technology plays in colonization as well? Would you say? With engineering and design and doing things the way that we do, are we colonizing the world to make it earthless, as you call it, or more human, controlled?
Yes, for sure. The movement of, let's call it coloniality, of modernity coloniality, has imposed the power of a technological world over other technologies, other forms of living and of relating with the world, right? So when you destroy a full rainforest to produce soya milk, for example, right? So what is it worth, and for whom, right? For who is that soya milk, and whose lives are being endangered, not also non-human lives, right? And the heritage, I think, what is very important to see is the long history, the temporal dimension of these technological interventions, right? When you create a soya plantation or a palm oil plantation, it will last for some time to be consumed immediately and to produce a lot of money, but it has destroyed a habitat that took millions of years to be there, right? And so it is, and you can also think it in the in most of these processes where you take things that have been produced through a very long temporality, a temporality that exceeds the life of the human, like the minerals, like the oil, and we just burn it in one instant, right, in the car. And I think that relation between the instant consumption that destroys the long temporality of life is what indigenous philosophies are very clearly seeing and saying aloud, but we don't hear it because we don't teach that in our universities. They are saying aloud, you are killing the earth, and we cannot hear it, you know. I mean, now we have the science that is measuring it, and now we see climate collapse coming and the climate crisis because we can measure it. But it has been said for a very long time in other systems of knowledge, right? And I think decoloniality is saying today, well, we need to listen to those knowledges and we need to value them in order to transform the way we are producing our world, you know?
Can we come up with an example for this? I'm thinking of the Netherlands, for example, which is an extremely designed and engineered landscape. You know, even the forests are planted in rigid straight lines. What can design and engineering and technology do to decolonize such an environment?
Yeah, I mean, first is the awareness of it. I think my students are always surprised when I tell them that the European continent is the first continent of ecological devastation, because everything is planted by man. I'm here using the masculine, right? And so we are worried that the rainforest in the Amazon is being lost, but we actually, in the Netherlands, live in a place where nature is gone. And if you go and see the 16th century paintings, you see these enormous trees around the houses, right? And you would think, oh, it's maybe a tropical area. No, this was the Netherlands, you know, with these ancient trees. And so it shows that this model of what I'm calling instrumental rationality, using the philosophical term, that puts the human in the capacity of using the earth as its instrument, has caused ecological devastation around the world, but also in Europe, right? So that is, I mean, we can clearly see that one of the big reasons of colonization is the search for resources that were being extinct in Europe, you know? So I think the awareness is very important, because that might help recognize other systems of knowledge where we can learn from, right? Instead of thinking we are always at the top of knowledge and we have nothing to learn from others, right? I think now that there is clear evidence that we have a lot to learn from people that knew very well how to consume the earth, but they decided not to. They decided to preserve earth because they didn't put themselves as owners of the earth, right? So how we, I think the big transformation that climate collapse is bringing is also a transformation of this humanism that is based on a superiority over earth and the life on earth.
It certainly challenges to think differently about our technology, but I know here in Delft, for example, there are steps towards circularity, bio-based, biomimicry, etc. How exactly does decolonizing, nuance itself? How is it different from that?
I mean, I think one of the conversations to have is about what I called in the previous talk, the humbling of the position of the researcher and the student, right? I think, for example, when you listen to indigenous knowledges, First Nations knowledges, you can see that their deep knowledge of earth processes is one in which not that let me say that they are not researching the earth as we would do it through our methodologies, but they are listening to the earth. They are learning from it, right? So they would say, for example, one of the great thinkers from Bolivia, Mamani, was saying, you know, our political system of democracy, of the ayllus, we learn it from the llamas, from the animals of the mountains, right? Because they live in community and they care for each other. So I think that is just an example of a non-anthropocentric view of the world, where what can we learn from Earth instead of how can we transform Earth, right? And I think that is an exercise of listening that many other civilizations, especially First Nations today, still carry. The idea that their sources of knowledge, their ancestors, are living beings on Earth, right? And the Earth itself. Instead of me classifying the Earth and dissecting the Earth to study it. You see, it's a reverse flow. So how can I receive? How can I understand the Earth? Can we develop a design and a technology that listens to the knowledge of the Earth instead of that wants to design Earth processes, you know? And I think that will be, it's a reversal of the question, you know?
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to give the floor to my co-host, and I think she'll have some questions for you as well.
Yes. Thank you again. I have some questions about indigenous philosophy. Yeah, because I was thinking, like, how can we ensure that if we listen to their voices, that it is used in an ethical way? Because what I sometimes see right now is that there's also, again, a lot of greenwashing when I see that indigenous people are coming to the Paris Agreement, or that there is like a 7 generations brand that is coming now.
Yeah, I think it's we have to be aware, and this is part of the decolonial awareness of the dangers of appropriation of other people's knowledges, right? So there is a distinction between really listening, and when I listen, I go beyond myself, because in the listening exercise, you get transformed, you begin thinking differently. From appropriation, that is kind of a touristic exercise of I go somewhere, I get the knowledge of others, I take photos, but I remain myself, right? And I think that is something that is always at play in these relations. So indigenous philosophies are there, they are speaking, they are in activism, but they often just get appropriated to, let's say, as a token of inclusion, for example, right? And they are not really taken at the level of seriousness that implies if we really listen to their knowledge, we are being called to transform ourselves and our institutions, right? And I think that is the decolonial moment. It's not just about let's say, soft multiculturalism where you include everybody, but it's how I can take seriously their knowledge so that it transforms the way I do things, right? The way I think about myself. And that's a question of positionality. If you think you are at the center of the world, you just include them, and you assume you are good because you have the power to include them. And so that is kind of the arrogant position and the non-decolonial position, right? And that just preserves your position of superiority. Whereas a decolonial position of listening implies the humbling of, okay, I know my position is very limited, it's implied in colonial history, I know I'm implicated in the dismissal of the knowledge of others, I will listen to it so that I begin transforming the way I think, because I know my thinking is insufficient, right? It's a very different exercise.
Yeah. And yeah, in general, indigenous communities are way more connected to nature, and they are also more surrounded by nature. If I'm looking here, my life in the Netherlands, I'm surrounded with a lot of buildings, technology, everything is made by human. What do you think that is needed here in the Netherlands to reconnect with nature, if nature is so far away most of the times?
Well, two things. One is, yes, you see the human-nature divide has been a master narrative of modernity, whereby putting indigenous people close to nature, people say, okay, they are behind the human that is separated from nature. And the decolonial says it's the reverse, right? The human that is separated from nature is producing conditions of earthlessness, of the loss of the earth, and is suffering from the separation from earth. And it is the relational philosophies of indigenous people that are teaching us that that separation needs to be overcome, that we need to relate back. And to relate to earth is not to be backward, it's to be ahead, you know, of the crisis we have today. So it is a very big answer for the crisis today. And so in that sense, I do see in the Netherlands many people connecting back. So many of my students practice permaculture or work with the forest. So they are trying to change the way they eat things they produce locally. So yes, nature has been severely damaged, and we live in a logic that is extremely separated from nature. And I think we need to become aware of that separation is an impoverishment of life, you know. Instead of being richer because we are more separated from nature, I think we have grown really poor, right? And that is already a turning of the narrative of the more technological you are, like the more artificial environment you are, then you are better, you know, and which will be the line of linear progress and development, right? In the Western narrative, we are saying, listening to indigenous philosophies, that is the reverse, that we have grown poorer and we are becoming, a term I have used before, orphans of the earth, you know. We are endangering the earth, we are killing the earth, and ourselves, we are suffering from that separation. So I think indigenous philosophies, First Nations philosophies, are really one of the most important sources of knowledge to overcome this disaster, this separation that is produced by the paradigm of a humanity that to be more human is to be separated from earth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Annalyn. Rolando, we are running out of time. I think I'd like to ask you if you have any personal tips for the students and engineers here in Delft. In relation to their study, you know, writing a thesis, doing a project, you know, where should they look for more information? How should they converse about this with their professors, their teachers, or with the university itself as an institution?
Yeah, I think, especially now in the times of Corona and social distancing, I think we have seen that the university is a great place, not because of the knowledge that comes through the screen that you can have in YouTube, but it's a great place because you can relate to people, right? So practices of talking among each other, of raising these questions, are very important. I think the asking with others instead of individual studying, you know, and instead of distancing. I think that is the beginning of this awareness. And then the second is to put whatever they are studying in relation to the crisis of our times, so the climate collapse and social inequality, racism, denigration, the impoverishment of the majority of the population of the world. And then whatever you study, you should ask, what is this for, right? Is this furthering the colonial divide? Is this furthering the colonial wound? Is this furthering social inequality or climate collapse? Or the reverse? Or is this healing the colonial wound? Is it listening to others? And is it relating back to Earth? Or is it separating us more from Earth? And I think if you have these basic questions in whatever you are studying, you ask for the purpose of what you are studying. And it's not about questioning the science, it's about asking the what for, right? So in our view, a good science is a science that has a purpose, an ethical guidance, an orientation. So we are not criticizing the methodology of 2 + 2 is 4, but we are questioning what for. Why am I learning this? Is it useful for the ethical question? Is it useful to help others, to undo social fractures, to heal the Earth? Or is this knowledge being instrumental to increase the crisis in which we are living?
This is a good final thought. It's a simple tool to ask this question over and over again. What is it for? Why am I doing this? But not easy, I would expect.
Yeah, in relation of the colonial difference. So what is for? The answer should not be to produce more technology or more money, or right. What is it for in relation to the crisis of our time?
Yeah.
Right? The destruction of Earth and the impoverishment and suffering of others. So if you put the suffering of others and the destruction of Earth in your picture, then you know, okay, this knowledge, what is it for? Can I put it at the service of this or not? Is it, am I being trained to serve something that I'm against ethically? Or can I really redirect it for things that are that give a purpose to what I know? You know, so we speak of moving from expert knowledge to meaningful knowledge. And meaningful knowledge is expert knowledge, but expert knowledge is not necessarily meaningful knowledge.
On its own, right?
Yes.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Vázquez, for joining us for this lecture. I have many more questions to ask you. I'm sure Annalyn does as well, but we are out of time. Yes, if I can turn to our viewers at home, I would like to say this series of Decolonizing Knowledge will continue, so please visit sg.tudelft.nl and keep an eye out for subsequent events in this series. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.